So the present presentation is more about going back to Indian philosophy to talk about more contemporary events. So the first part of the presentation is about journalism epistemologies. I start off with epistemologies, I go to journalism epistemologies, and then I talk about why the Nyaya philosophy is so very important, or why this has such an important role to play. So epistemology, as we know, investigates the nature of knowledge, what we know, the process through which we acquire knowledge, and how do we justify that the knowledge is real. Because as we know, journalism makes a very astounding epistemological claim that we have the right tools to find out what is reality, or we know that we have the tools to find out what is truth. So how we justify these truth claims is a very important role. Because as we know, journalism is also one of the very important entities in society which produces knowledge. So it's a very important knowledge producing entity as well. So the epistemology study, it begins with the understanding that our thoughts are not always true. That we may hold false beliefs, or we may have uncertain perceptions. And how do we go beyond that? And that happens very often, that we believe something is true, but practically it is not. And there are so many examples about it. For example, we believe that the space cannot be compressed, but quantum physics tells us that space can be compressed. It begins with the understanding that whatever we know might not be true. Or one of the important ways in which we justify our truth claims is through these everyday practices. It includes objectivity claims, as we know. I want to go into that direction, but these objectivity claims have been discussed over and over again by Michael Scursion and so many other people. So one of the ways in which we justify our truth claims is through access to official sources of information. We say credibility of the sources plays a very important role in how journalists present information. If it is an official source, it is regarded as a good piece of information. So the credibility of the sources is one area, so we can be very clear about. So experts are valued for their deep knowledge. So apart from the official sources, the experts are other important sources of information. So when we are making those truth claims, these experts also, because they are knowledgeable in their domain or in the specific areas, so they bring their authenticity. So we call this as a bureaucratic justification. So the first part of this epistemological justification is a bureaucratic justification. That we have either official sources or we have experts justifying the information. So that kind of helps the journalist sidestep their own responsibility for validating the sources. Because it's an official person, because it's an expert, it's regarded as credible generally. And we know that the beat system kind of perpetuates this. Because it's a beat system, we know those people, and we can keep on going back to the same people for information and presenting them as true credible information. So that's how we have been kind of doing that very often. But these days, thanks to the digital media, and I'm rushing because I can see it's 5 minutes 38 seconds, so I have to finish that in 15 minutes, because I know Professor Josephy for more than 15 years. She's very strict with time. So to come back, so nowadays, because of the digital media, the immediacy is kind of regarded as or transparency, or the live blogging. Because I'm doing it live, because I'm showing it to you immediately, the truth claims are justified. So that's another epistemological justification that we provide. Of course, data journalism can go on to another direction. So these are the traditional ways of justifying true knowledge, as we suggest. Now, in this paper, of course, again, the algorithmic judgment, and we are in the age of machine learning and AI, and we know that we rely on algorithmic judgment for so many things. And of course, that is, and again, because it's been trained on certain data set which is very similar to us. That's why if it finds something as reliable, it got to be true, because that's more technological determinism point of view, that okay, that's it. So basically, we had that bureaucratic judgment, we had, as I said, the transparency model, we have the data journalism model, we have the algorithmic judgment model. Now I want to introduce a very important philosophy. The first one, this is the Nyaya philosophy. Now most of our philosophies started before the current era. They are more than 2000 years old. They started off as oral philosophies. So they were aphorisms which people kind of memorized, and they passed on from one generation to the other. So that's how these philosophies began, with single line or double line aphorisms. So there is Nyaya, there is Sankhya, there is Yoga, there is Vedanta, many others. So we are going to talk about this because this is what many other Western authors also, especially in the field of rhetoric studies and others, have found this very, very useful. So I propose to have that as part of the journalism project as well. So it primarily focuses on logic, epistemology, and metaphysics part. So this was composed by the sage Akshapada Gautam. So in 2nd century BC. So they were like the sutras, they call it, the aphorisms, just as strings of thoughts. So there are no written records for that. So how do we know that these thoughts existed? Because in 450 current era, Vatsyayana wrote a bhashya, a commentary on the Nyaya Sutras, which were known as Nyaya Bhashyas. It's very important to know this history because these were debates that carried on. So there were objections to the Nyaya Sutras, and those objections were answered by Vatsyayana in 450 current era, and he wrote a bhashya there, that's a commentary. There were objections to the commentary. It was again written by Udyoktara in 550 current era, and it was known as Nyaya Bhashya Vartik. So that was again responding to the objections, and this debate was carried forward in these texts. It went to Vachaspati Mishra in the 900 current era, and he wrote the Nyaya Vartik Tatparya Tika, then Udayanacharya. So these were, these texts were debated upon, pondered upon, written, over thousands of years. So there's a 2000-year-old history about, regarding what is true knowledge and what is not true knowledge. And that's very, very important, when we talk of, journalism epistemologies as well, because it views all knowledge as Pramana born. Pramana means a knowledge source. So there has to be a knowledge source, and you have to identify what is that knowledge source, and then only can you claim that this is true knowledge. All our different philosophies have different kinds of pramanas, or as I say, sources of knowledge, and this aligns with a lot of contemporary philosophy. I'm not going to talk about all those contemporary philosophies, but it's very important that this philosophical project is centered on the notion of the pramana, or the knowledge source. So pramanas are the sources of an individual's justified beliefs, and it is also the final court of appeal. So if I say that I have this pramana, and or if I'm saying that okay, this is what I believe, then I must have a knowledge source, and you have a right to verify that knowledge source. So that is kind of the detailed deliberations that we go into in this kind of thing. Yeah. So these are the four pramanas that they talk about. First of all, of course, there is it's perception. Now there are deeper philosophical intonations. There is not just what you perceive with your senses. There are layers to that. I unfortunately don't have time. It's just 4 more minutes left, so I'll just very quickly go through these things. So the first of the pramanas is pratyaksha, which is perception, and if it leads you to successful action, then it is a valid pramana. So there are valid pramanas, there are invalid. So as I said, pramanas could be you can very roughly translate that as evidence, but okay, we say that as sources of knowledge. So without a knowledge source, there would be no effective cognition, and it is an effective cognition only if it leads to a goal-directed activity, and arthavat, as they say. The second part is inference, and these are loose translations because the Sanskrit terms are much more profound. So the anumana, so how do we agree on a particular point, or when I'm making a certain point which as a journalist I claim to be true, whether what is the basis of that anumana, that inference. There is analogy as well, which is known as upamana or comparison. And finally, there is this shabda, an expert source. Now, who is an expert again has to be justified. So you just can't claim an expert, to be a valid source of knowledge. So the Nyaya philosophers consider this apta as very important sources of testimony. So these chapters, so if it's an expert testimony, that is also regarded as a valid source of knowledge. So the point we are trying to make here is that unless we kind of codify it, or unless we bring this thing into the picture, that whatever knowledge sources we are talking about, we should be very clear about what those knowledge sources are and whether those knowledge sources are verifiable, and what are the basis on which you're forming your opinion. That's very, very important. And that's where the very, very profound kind of an explanation of these sources, or the identification of these sources of knowledge are important. And finally, whenever there is a point of dispute, again this is very well codified. I have another paper in another section where I talk about the rhetorical areas, but I just want to introduce these rhetorical schemes here. It's very, very different from the Aristotelian rhetoric, for example. It is a 5-step process for valid inference. First, there is a proposition, which is the pratigya. Then we give a reason for that proposition, that I'm going to present this because of this. Then I give an example, the drishtanta or the udaharan, which is very, very central to this philosophy that I'm talking about. That I give an example of that. Then what is the application, and finally conclusion. So this panchavya is a very important part of as we said, discussions or deliberations. So just to put it in a schematic format, this is what it starts off with a proposition, with a reason, with an example, with applicability, and with restating. So Nyaya epistemology encourages the validation of knowledge through multiple pramanas, and that's very important, and that's what we through this paper are proposing for these contemporary epistemologists to adopt these multiple pramana approach for justifying their knowledge claims. And as we said, this is a very, very systematic approach to verifying truth claims. So contemporary epistemology can adopt a lot of these principles, and this can provide us with a lot more robust framework for providing all that. So if I don't stop here, Professor BT will be very angry. So thank you very much.
Thank you.